All right. Hi, everybody. It's Alexander and Kara again with another comic chat. This time going along with one book, which we do every April here at the St. Joseph County Public Library. One book, of course, again, this year is True Grit because we did not get to do one book last year due to COVID. So going along with that, we chose Western comics. And I'm going to let Kara go first with hers.
This first comic that we're going to talk about is called Rapunzel's Revenge. And you might not think that Rapunzel could be a Western comic, but this is kind of like a mashup between a fairy tale and the Western genre. It begins just like you imagine Rapunzel would, where there's like this lady who she really wants some lettuce over this wall. So her husband goes and steals it, and then they get cursed, and then they have to give their daughter away. So Rapunzel kind of grows up in this really like lush, like foresty area that's just like protected by this wall all around, and she thinks the rest of the world is like that, but she doesn't really understand like why she's not allowed to go over the wall. So one day, when she's a teenager, she climbs over and she sees that over the wall it's just like this desert wasteland, and she finds out that one of there are these people who have to work for the person that she thought was her mother Gothel, over the wall, and they're kind of like slaves, and one of them is her real mother. So this kind of sets her down a path against Mother Gothel, and then she gets put up in a tower. But when she leaves, she just kind of like goes off on her own and starts this adventure, um, and ends up paired up with this guy here, Jack of the Beanstalk, we eventually learn in the story. And he also has this goose he's carrying around, and he's waiting for it to lay a golden egg. So they just kind of go adventuring together, and, as they venture across the wasteland, they find like all these different people who have been hurt by Gothel, and eventually they decide that they have to just like go and deal with this and save everybody. So it's really just a great mashup of fairy tales and adventure. And I love that they also kind of like talk in that stereotypical like Western lingo too. Um, I don't I don't think it's on this page, but it's just very charming. So I like this one a lot. It's only available on Overdrive. It's also by Shannon and Dean Hale. Shannon Hale is known for the Princess Academy series, as well as Goose Girl and Princess in Black, and lots of other great books for kids.
She has another graphic novel series, the Friends series, that's just superb. This sounds very Fable, right?
It
And the
it
first,
is kind of, yeah, it's kind of a little bit like that, but a little bit more like uplifting than Fable, but still
not quite,
really good.
not quite as HBO.
Right? Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of HBO, the first book that I read for this was Alejandro Jodorowsky's Sons of El Topo, which is a direct sequel to his 70s art film El Topo. Um, Unfortunately, you do kind of need the context, and it gives you a little bit of it at the beginning of this. So El Topo was a very brutal outlaw, um, who eventually starts going on a path of enlightenment and begins to perform miracles and gets a literal cult following. And it starts marrying Christian mysticism and Eastern mysticism and surrealism in it. And so I was expecting to really, really love this because I remember liking the movie a whole lot. Got to admit, I haven't seen it since I was younger. Um, but this one, his first son, Cain, was abandoned by El Topo. And you see this in the comic at like 6 or 7, and is basically just filled with rage and is trying to find him and tries to kill his dad and fails because he can't do anything to him because his dad has essentially ascended, and also he is cursed to not be even seen or noticed by people, which causes him to do some very brutal acts to try to get even noticed. Unfortunately, I found it a little hard to read because you need such context. Like you almost have to read it exactly after watching the movie, and the um, the art. Sometimes I found it difficult to figure out who was talking. Um, like at one point, his son or his brother Abel is there, and his father, and I could not tell the difference between the two. Um, and both extremely different characters. They were just drawn so similarly and kind of scrunched, even using the magnifying glass part of Hoopla. So not everything is a home run. Wasn't a super big fan of it. Also, a little bit of the brutality I thought was. I know it's part of the Western genre, um, but it didn't have to do it all the time, like every 3 pages. So, or that could just be me having my nerves shot by this year. So we'll see.
I think that's something you definitely come up against in the Western genre is like the brutality. And I went through few different comics before I landed on the ones that I wanted to do this week as well. And I think since it's paired with comics, like a lot of times comics can be like really like bloody and gruesome too because of the graphic arts. So yeah.
And it is something to be aware of that the brutality also exists in a lot of westerns and in like film noir and noir detective hardboiled detective novels, and because it's the contrast that you need that to give the hero kind of that motivation to try to tame the land, as it were.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
All right. Speaking of brutality, we're
yeah.
gonna go to this alarming frame to talk about Jonah Hex. This comic run is actually it's called All Star Western, and the subtitle here is Guns and Gotham. So you can just guess like why I wanted to talk about this.
Catnip for Kara.
Yeah. But I really enjoyed it too. And this, even though it's called All Star Western, the run is about Jonah Hex. And if you don't know anything about Jonah Hex, basically he's like the Western superhero of the DC universe. He tends to show up like as a cameo in a lot of others, and like currently in the like if you're up to date with the current DC universe, he's been turned into like a robot on like a planet in space. Um, so that's fun. And he's also like, if you like, kind of like the Batman type characters where you've got like this real surly guy who is solving crime, then you'll probably like Jonah Hex. This one it takes place in Gotham, but like kind of before Gotham was a city, even. So this is like, you know, Gotham has always been a slum, but this is like before there was any like technological advancement or anything like that. So, some other characters pop up in this as well, like the mayor is Mayor Cobblepot, not the Penguin, but ancestor of the Penguin. And they have the Waynes in here too, so it's fun to see sort of like the connections to like people who will become major characters later on in the Batman universe. And also, this is told from the point of view of Amadeus Arkham, who founds Arkham Asylum eventually, and he's sort of like in this one Jonah Hex's sidekick. So we get more of his point of view than we do Jonah Hex, which kind of makes it interesting because he's like analyzing his behavior and stuff like that. Um, and they make like an interesting pair.
It's like Holmes and Watson.
Yes. I also like the art in this, which is why I chose this frame specifically. And even though it does look kind of brutal, like we were talking about before, because like the sepia tones in here, I just love where it really gives you that sense of like, yes, this is history and this is like what you would expect from a Western.
Well, it looks like a fight. I mean, it's just because the wood is red tinted, but that's not actually blood. Although I like the person
Yeah.
whose face is stuck in the spittoon.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Poor dude.
And I think back here we've got in the back we've got Amadeus Arkham, who's just kind of like, what's happening? So yeah. Okay, I am going to stop the share because our next book, Alexander, is going to show you himself.
Yeah, I got it in my hand. I physical copy. So the next book I'm going to talk about is by Edward Breaker. It's Pulp, and it's kind of it's a western, but western by way of flashback. So it follows an old man who at the point when you meet him is quite an old man, and he's writing westerns in the 30s, in the late 30s, and you find out that the reason he's so good at writing westerns and they sell so well is because he was an outlaw himself. He and his brother were kind of in the middle of a feud, as it were, and so two people trying to get them to leave their ranch, and then they lost family members, went and got revenge, became bandits for a while. He eventually moved to New York, settled down, and is now writing westerns. They aren't selling super well. He he ends up defending a young Hasidic Jew because remember this is the 30s. Gets mugged, has a heart attack in the middle of it, and then in an act of desperation tries to rob an armored car. Because yeah, and then he gets stopped by a Pinkerton who recognizes him, who had chased him in his youth, and is like, you know what, I got an idea for you, and instead gets his help because they're gonna go rob some Nazis. Because you're like, it's coming up. I mean, coming up to real historic events. The Nazis held a huge rally in Madison Square Garden in New York in the 30s, and so it's talking about that kind of time period, and also the idea of how do you retire from this life if you're always a violent bandit, are you always going to be that? And it does make mention of like at one point he like he talks about his old gang and one person who he hated because he's like we had to stop him from killing people and things. So bandit with a heart of gold type of guy. But I really liked it, and it's got these really neat little flashbacks where it changes tone entirely. And so this, I'm giving away the climax here but it's pairing it with the flashbacks, his modern day to back when he and his brother were outlaws. And so like you get the sepia tone. This is still New York, but it still looks just like, I mean, gangster stories are just Western stories told in a city. So
True, very true.
All the same thing. And I like the weird like stippling effect of the backgrounds where it's almost they almost just took like a nice like a pastel sponge and just
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just a neat little story kind of yeah. Can you ever actually leave that life behind you?
It reminds me a little bit of American Vampire because I think in that one too, you have a character who is telling the story um, in the that's happened in the past, and to that even like True Grit, where we have Maddie Ross who is telling us her story of her as a young woman when she's an old woman,
Mm-hmm.
um, and with the flashbacks and whatnot. So
Someone who you can leave the West itself behind, but you may not leave your actions behind.
mm-hmm,
Type of thing.
exactly.
Yep.
All right.
So I think that about wraps it up. I don't think we have any idea what we're going to do for next month, so it might be a grab bag. If you guys have any suggestions, please let us know as always. But otherwise, keep reading. It's all we can do anymore to keep our focus. And graphic novels have been a huge help for me. I hope they have been for you guys too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.